They told you to check your candy. They warned you about the razor blades hidden in apples, the needles tucked inside chocolate bars, the poison mixed into pixie sticks. Every October, the same ritual of fear played out in living rooms across America. Parents under fluorescent kitchen lights, cutting open candy bars, inspecting wrappers, throwing away homemade treats from neighbors they'd known for decades. But what if I told you that this entire cultural phenomenon, this annual ceremony of paranoia that's been seared into the American psyche for over 50 years, was built on a foundation of lies? What if the monster you were taught to fear wasn't lurking in the shadows of your neighborhood, but sitting at your own dinner table? What if the only child ever actually killed by poisoned Halloween candy was murdered by the one person who should have protected him most? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most disturbing cases of psychological manipulation in American history. A case where a father's greed created a nationwide panic, where one man's evil act transformed an innocent childhood tradition into a ritual of suspicion and fear, where the media, the public, and law enforcement all became unwitting accomplices in spreading a myth that would fundamentally alter how we celebrate, how we trust, and how we raise our children. This is the story they don't want to tell you. The story of how a single murder weaponized an entire nation's protective instincts and turned neighbor against neighbor. You think you know this story. You don't.
The O'Brien family sets out into the neighborhood around 8 o'clock. Ronald, his wife Daneen, Timothy, and his 5-year-old sister, Elizabeth. They join another family, the Bates, creating a small group of children and adults moving from house to house under the streetlights. It seems perfect, normal, safe, the kind of scene that could be on a postcard celebrating American suburban life. But Ronald O'Brien has already set his plan in motion. Days earlier, he'd purchased cyanide from a chemical supply company, lying about needing it for a research project. He'd obtained 5 21-inch pixie sticks, those paper tubes filled with colored sugar that kids love, and he'd carefully opened them, mixed in enough cyanide to kill multiple adults, and resealed them with glue and staples. 5 poisoned tubes, 5 potential victims, his own son Timothy, his daughter Elizabeth, and 3 other children from the neighborhood, added to the list to create confusion, to make it look like a random attack by a psychopath targeting trick-or-treaters. The other children were camouflage, human shields made of innocence, their potential deaths serving only to obscure his true target. As the group walks through the neighborhood, they approach a house with its lights off. No one answers the door. The children start to move on, but Ronald lingers. He waits, and then he rejoins the group, now carrying 5 pixie sticks, claiming a man at the darkened house had finally answered and handed them out. Nobody questions him. Why would they? He's a father, a deacon, a respectable member of the community. The idea that he might be lying, that he might have just pulled poisoned candy from his own pocket, doesn't even enter anyone's mind. This is the America of 1974, where authority figures are still largely trusted, where men in suits who go to church are automatically presumed to be good people, where the rot hasn't yet been fully exposed. The group continues trick-or-treating. Ronald makes sure to hand out the poisoned pixie sticks to specific children, 1 to Timothy, 1 to Elizabeth, 1 to Whitney Parker, the 10-year-old son of the family they're with, and 2 more to other children in the neighborhood. He's methodical, calm, smiling. He jokes with the kids, laughs with the other parents, plays his role perfectly. At home later that night, the children dump out their candy hauls, that beautiful, chaotic pile of sugar and artificial colors that represents childhood joy in its purest form. Timothy is excited. He wants to eat some candy before bed. His father encourages him. "Go ahead," Ronald says, "but try this pixie sticks first, it's your favorite." Even after brushing his teeth, Timothy is allowed this special treat. His mother hesitates, says it's late, but Ronald insists. The candy is given. Timothy struggles to eat the powder. It tastes bitter, wrong, He drinks Kool-Aid to wash it down, trying to get rid of the chemical taste that his young brain recognizes as danger but can't articulate. Within minutes, he begins vomiting. His body is convulsing.
Daneen O'Brien screams for her husband. Timothy is on the bathroom floor, his small body racked with seizures. His lips are turning blue. Foam is coming from his mouth. His eyes are rolling back. Ronald calls an ambulance, and here's where his performance reaches its peak. He rides with his dying son, playing the terrified father, holding Timothy's hand, begging him to hold on. At the hospital, doctors work frantically, but there's nothing they can do. The amount of cyanide Timothy ingested was massive, enough to kill several grown men. His small body never had a chance. At 11:30 p.m., less than 2 hours after eating the poisoned candy, Timothy O'Brien is pronounced dead. He died in agony, his nervous system shutting down, his brain hemorrhaging, his organs failing simultaneously. The last thing he probably processed was confusion. Why did this candy hurt him? Why wasn't Daddy fixing it? Where did the pain come from? And Ronald O'Brien stands in that emergency room, tears streaming down his face, playing his role so convincingly that nurses console him, that doctors apologize for not being able to save his son, that no one, not a single person in that hospital, suspects that the grieving father holding his wife is actually the murderer. He asks about the life insurance policy within hours. The body isn't even cold yet, and he's already trying to collect. But he phrases it carefully, makes it seem like he's worried about funeral expenses, about taking care of his surviving daughter. News of Timothy's death spreads through Houston like wildfire. By the next morning, every parent in the city is terrified. The narrative is simple but horrifying. A maniac is poisoning Halloween candy. Trick-or-treating, that sacred American tradition, has been weaponized. Your neighbors might be killers. That sweet old lady down the street might be putting rat poison in her homemade cookies. The cheerful family with the full-size candy bars might be psychopaths. Trust no one. Police immediately launch an investigation, and the media amplifies the panic. Headlines scream about the dangers of Halloween. News anchors warn parents to throw away all their children's candy. Hospitals offer free X-ray services to check treats for hidden razors and needles. The panic is real, visceral, and completely justified given what they believe happened. Except it's based on a lie. Ronald O'Brien is interviewed by police as a witness, not a suspect. He tells them about the house with the lights off, about the man who finally answered the door and handed out the pixie sticks. He describes the man vaguely enough that it could be anyone. He leads investigators on a wild goose chase through the neighborhood, trying to identify which house it was. He points to one home, then seems unsure maybe it was that one, or possibly the one next door. The homeowner is brought into questioning, a terrified man who is to prove he wasn't even home that night, that he was at work, that he has alibis and witnesses. But the investigators are good at their jobs. They start noticing inconsistencies. Ronald's story keeps changing in small ways. The details don't quite line up. And then they discover something that shifts the entire investigation. Ronald had tried to collect on insurance policies before. He'd made claims for minor incidents, always pushing for maximum payout. He'd been in financial trouble for years. He'd been asking co-workers about how to obtain cyanide. He'd taken out massive life insurance policies on his children just months before. The police begin watching him, and they don't like what they see. This man whose son just died is too calm, too focused on practical matters, too interested in money. When detectives interview the other families from that Halloween night, more inconsistencies emerge. Nobody remembers him being gone long enough to actually receive candy from a house. The timeline doesn't work. And when they finally track down every single person who lived on that street, they discover the truth. Not one house gave out pixie sticks that night. Not one. The police obtain a search warrant. They execute it with the precision of people who know they're hunting a monster.
and what they find confirms their worst fears. Evidence that Ronald purchased cyanide, evidence of the insurance policies, evidence of financial desperation so severe that murdering his own children seemed like a solution. The 5 pixie sticks came from a single purchase. They weren't randomly distributed by some neighborhood psychopath. They came from one source, one man, one father. Ronald Clark O'Brien is arrested on November 5, 1974, 8 days after he murdered his son, 8 days during which he played the grieving father, during which he was consoled and pitied, during which the entire city of Houston hunted for a monster that was hiding in plain sight behind a mask of paternal grief. The news of his arrest sends a different kind of shockwave through America, because this isn't a random stranger. This isn't some mentally ill drifter tampering with candy. This is a father, a church deacon, a man who looked like everyone's neighbor, everyone's co-worker, everyone's friend. If this seemingly normal man could murder his own child for insurance money, what did that say about the foundations of trust that American society was built on? The trial begins in May 1975, and it's a media sensation. Cameras aren't allowed in courtrooms yet, but reporters pack every seat, transcribing every word, every gesture, every moment. The prosecution builds an airtight case. They present the evidence of cyanide purchase. They show the jury the life insurance policies, totaling over $60,000 on Timothy alone, a massive sum in 1974, worth well over $300,000 today. They parade witness after witness who testify about Ronald's financial problems, his desperate conversations about needing money, his questions about poisons and untraceable methods. The defense tries to create reasonable doubt. They suggest that maybe someone else had access to the candy. Maybe there really was a man at a dark house. Maybe Ronald is being framed. But it's hollow, transparent, desperate.
The most damning testimony comes from Ronald's own community. His pastor testifies about how Ronald had asked questions about how long after a death insurance companies typically pay out. His co-workers describe conversations where Ronald had inquired about obtaining cyanide, about how much would be lethal, about whether it could be detected in autopsy. These weren't abstract philosophical discussions. These were research, planning, premeditation. And then there's the evidence about the other children. The prosecution proves that Ronald didn't just try to kill Timothy, he was willing to murder 4 other children, including his own 5-year-old daughter, just to create a smokescreen for his crime. Elizabeth O'Brien was saved only because her mother didn't let her eat the candy that night, insisting it was too late and she'd already brushed her teeth. Whitney Parker was saved because his father, suspicious of candy from an unknown source and already paranoid about poisoning reports from previous years, threw the pixie sticks away. The other 2 children never ate theirs, random chance being the only barrier between them and the same agonizing death Timothy suffered. This wasn't just murder. This was attempted mass child murder for profit. The jury deliberates for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. The penalty phase is even shorter. Death. Ronald Clark O'Brien is sentenced to die for killing his son. And the courtroom erupts in applause, a rare breach of decorum that the judge doesn't even try to stop. But the story doesn't end with Ronald O'Brien's conviction. In fact, that's where the real damage begins. Because while one father's evil act was caught and punished, the myth he created took on a life of its own. The panic about poisoned Halloween candy had already been simmering in American consciousness throughout the early 1970s. There had been isolated reports, mostly hoaxes or misunderstandings, of tampered treats. But they were rare, unverified, and largely debunked. What Timothy O'Brien's death did was provide concrete proof that the danger was real. A child had died from poisoned candy. It happened. Therefore, it could happen again. The media, police departments, and parenting organizations all began sounding alarms. Guidelines were issued about how to inspect candy. Warnings were broadcast about accepting homemade treats. Hospitals set up X-ray stations where concerned parents could have their children's Halloween hauls examined for foreign objects. The tradition of trick-or-treating began to change fundamentally. In many neighborhoods, it died entirely, replaced by organized trunk-or-treat events in church parking lots or school festivals where candy distribution could be controlled and monitored. The spontaneous, community-building joy of children wandering from door to door, of neighbors connecting through a shared tradition, began to erode. And here's the insidious part. There was never actually a widespread threat. Researchers have studied decades of Halloween candy reports, and they found virtually no confirmed cases of strangers deliberately poisoning or injuring children through trick-or-treat candy.
The few incidents that did occur were almost always hoaxes, either children fabricating stories for attention or parents making false reports. When injuries did happen, they were accidents or the children harming themselves for attention. But facts don't matter once fear takes root. The myth of the Halloween sadist, the stranger who hates children enough to murder them through candy, became embedded in American culture. It was taught in schools. It was featured in news segments every October. It became common knowledge, the kind of thing everyone just knows is true, even though it isn't. Sociologists call this a moral panic, a phenomenon where society becomes collectively convinced of a threat that is vastly overblown or non-existent. But moral panics aren't random. They serve a purpose. They channel anxiety. In the 1970s, America was undergoing massive social changes. The post-World War II consensus was shattering. The Vietnam War had exposed government lies. Watergate had destroyed faith in political leadership. The economy was stagnating while inflation soared. Traditional family structures were being questioned. Women were entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers, challenging gender roles. Divorce rates were climbing. The certainties of the 1950s were collapsing, and no one knew what would replace them. Into this anxiety came the perfect scapegoat, the dangerous stranger. The moral panic about Halloween candy wasn't really about candy at all. It was about the terrifying feeling that you couldn't trust anyone anymore, that the world was becoming hostile and incomprehensible, that the basic safety you'd always assumed for your children was an illusion. Ronald O'Brien provided the proof that those fears needed to metastasize into full cultural transformation. Except the danger wasn't from strangers. It was from within the family. It was from a father. But that truth was too disturbing, too destabilizing to fully process. So the collective unconscious of America redirected the fear outward, toward the anonymous other, the stranger in the shadows. This psychological displacement is a common defense mechanism. When the real threat is too close, too intimate, too destructive to our sense of safety, we project it onto something external that we can guard against. You can teach your children not to take candy from strangers. You can inspect wrappers. You can install porch lights and security cameras. But how do you protect children from the people who are supposed to love them? How do you screen for evil in your own home? You can't. So instead, you focus on the threat you can control, even if it's largely imaginary. The Halloween candy panic allowed parents to feel like they were protecting their children without confronting the much darker statistical reality. Children are far more likely to be harmed by family members than by strangers. The vast majority of child abuse, neglect, and murder happens within homes, perpetrated by parents, step-parents, or close relatives. But we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to believe that. So we obsess over razor blades and apples that don't exist, while ignoring the violence happening behind closed doors in our own neighborhoods.
Ronald O'Brien's case reveals another disturbing truth about how evil operates in plain sight. He was a church deacon. He was active in his religious community. He used his Christian faith as a shield, as a costume that made him seem trustworthy and moral. This pattern repeats throughout history, and we still fall for it every time. We assume that religious involvement equals goodness, that someone who prays in public and quotes scripture must be safe to trust with our children, our money, our vulnerability. But institutions built on trust are magnets for predators precisely because that trust provides cover. The church didn't make Ronald O'Brien evil. His evil existed independent of his faith. But his involvement in the church gave him a protective coloration, a veneer of respectability that made people less likely to question his motives or suspect his actions. How many other wolves have we welcomed into the fold because they knew the right words to say, the right poses to strike, the right communities to infiltrate? While Ronald sat on death row, appeals dragging on for years, the myth he'd inadvertently created continued to spread. By the 1980s, the Halloween candy panic had merged with other moral panics of the era. The satanic panic swept through America, with prosecutors and therapists convinced that vast networks of devil worshippers were ritually abusing children. The McMartin preschool trial and dozens of similar cases destroyed lives based on coerced testimony and mass hysteria. Halloween, with its imagery of witches and devils, became associated with these imagined satanic conspiracies. Churches held hell houses and judgment houses instead of Halloween celebrations, terrifying children with graphic depictions of eternal damnation. The innocent pagan celebration of Autumn's End, the Celtic Samhain that had evolved into modern Halloween, was reframed as a demonic holiday that endangered children's souls and bodies alike. Trick-or-treating increasingly became an activity done only in daylight, only with parents hovering nearby, only with candy from commercially sealed packages purchased at stores. The spontaneous, slightly transgressive joy of children roaming free on a dark night, empowered to knock on strangers' doors and demand treats, was being systematically eliminated. And every October, the media would recycle the same stories. They'd mention the O'Brien case, always referred to as the Halloween candy murder, always presented as validation for parental paranoia. They'd reference unverified reports of tampered candy from police departments who had incentive to justify their own existence and budgets. They'd interview parents who swore they'd found needles or razor blades in their children's candy, stories that consistently fell apart under any scrutiny, but were never corrected with the same prominence as the initial alarming reports. Meanwhile, Ronald O'Brien sat in his cell at the Ellis unit in Texas, filing appeal after appeal, each one denied. His ex-wife Daneen had divorced him and disappeared from public life, taking Elizabeth and changing their names, trying to build some kind of existence away from the horror of what had happened. Can you imagine that? Being the wife who didn't know, the mother who almost let her daughter eat poisoned candy handed to her by her own father.
The psychological damage doesn't end with death. It radiates outward, destroying everyone in its blast radius. The other families whose children were targeted also shattered. The Parkers moved away, unable to stay in a neighborhood where everyone knew that their son had almost been murdered as collateral damage in someone else's insurance scheme. The families who received the poisoned pixie sticks that were never eaten had to live with the knowledge that random chance was the only reason their children survived. No wise parenting, no protective instinct, no prayer or precaution, just luck. That's a hard truth to live with. It undermines the comforting lie that good parents can always keep their children safe, that love and vigilance are enough. Sometimes evil wins, sometimes children die, and sometimes the only thing that stands between a child and death is whether they felt like eating a particular piece of candy at a particular moment. The existential terror of that randomness is unbearable, so we create structures of control, rituals of inspection, rules and guidelines that let us pretend we have power over chaos. On March 31, 1984, Ronald Clark O'Brien was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He was 40 years old. He had spent nearly a decade on death row, longer than his son Timothy had been alive. There were protesters at the prison that night, but not the usual opponents of capital punishment. These were people dressed as ghosts and ghouls, Halloween costumes and march, holding signs celebrating his execution. They called him the Candyman, a nickname the media had gleefully assigned. His last meal was simple: steak, French fries, and peach cobbler. The last words he spoke were a claim of innocence, an assertion that he'd been wrongly convicted, that he was the victim of the conspiracy. He maintained this lie until the chemicals stopped his heart. Even in death, he couldn't admit what he'd done. There's a particular kind of narcissism in that final performance, a commitment to the false self that trumps even the desire for absolution or peace. He died as he lived, as a liar, a performer, a man who believed his own comfort was worth any amount of suffering inflicted on others. News of his execution was met with widespread approval. Opinion polls showed over 90% of Americans supported his death sentence. Even people who generally opposed capital punishment made exceptions for O'Brien. He'd killed his own child for money. He'd been willing to murder 4 other children to cover his tracks. He'd violated every sacred bond of parenthood and trust. If anyone deserved execution, surely it was him. But his death didn't end the curse he'd placed on Halloween. If anything, it reinforced it. The execution was covered extensively in every article, every news segment, every mention reinforced the narrative. Halloween candy killed a child. The father did it, yes, but the mechanism was poisoned candy, distributed on Halloween. The specific details matter less to cultural memory than the broad outline. Candy, death, Halloween, danger. By the 1990s, entire generations of American children had grown up never experiencing the Halloween their parents remembered. They'd never known the freedom of roaming their neighborhoods unsupervised, of staying out until late, of trusting that the adults in their community were basically safe.
They've been raised on fear, stranger danger, don't talk to anyone you don't know, never accept food from people you haven't been introduced to. The world is hostile. Trust no one. This is what Ronald O'Brien's evil accomplished. Not just the death of his son, though that alone is an immeasurable tragedy. Not just the near death of 4 other children, but the poisoning of an entire cultural tradition, the infection of childhood itself with paranoia and suspicion. Researchers who study child development note that the decline in unsupervised outdoor play, in community interaction, in the kind of independence that previous generations took for granted has had measurable negative effects. Children today have higher rates of anxiety and depression. They're less physically active, less socially competent, less resilient in the face of challenges. Some of this is due to technology, to screens replacing outdoor play. But much of it comes from the culture of fear that tells parents the world is too dangerous to let children explore it. And Halloween candy panic is one of the foundational myths of that fear culture. Here's the darkest irony. By focusing on the imaginary threat of stranger danger, we've made children less safe from the real threats.
When you teach children that strangers are the primary danger, you inadvertently teach them that people they know are safe. But most abuse happens within circles of trust. Most children who are harmed by family members, family friends, coaches, teachers, clergy, people who have access and authority. By obsessing over the razor blade and the apple, we've ignored the uncle who shouldn't be left alone with kids. The Halloween candy panic serves institutional interests, too. Police departments justify expanded budgets with programs to X-ray candy and patrol neighborhoods on Halloween night. Media outlets get easy content every October, recycling the same fear-mongering stories with minimal effort. Companies that manufacture sealed branded candy benefit from the destruction of homemade treat giving, consolidating the holiday into a commercial transaction rather than a community exchange. Fear is profitable. It sells newspapers and gets clicks. It justifies police presence and surveillance. It moves product. And once fear becomes embedded in culture, it's almost impossible to dislodge, even when evidence overwhelmingly proves the fear is unfounded. We're living in the world that Ronald O'Brien helped create, a world where community bonds have frayed, where trust is scarce, where childhood is increasingly supervised and structured and confined. This isn't all his fault, obviously. He was one man, one murderer among many. The social forces that led to our current culture of fear are complex and multifaceted. But his crime provided a focal point, a narrative justification for anxieties that were already present. He gave paranoia a face and a story. Timothy O'Brien's death has been used, exploited, and repurposed countless times since 1974. Every October, his name comes up. Every Halloween, his murder is mentioned in articles warning parents to inspect candy. He's become a symbol, a cautionary tale, a justification. But he was a real child, a boy who liked pixie sticks and probably wanted to be a dinosaur or an astronaut or whatever 8-year-old boys dream about.
He trusted his father. That trust killed him. And then his death was used to teach millions of other children not to trust. There's something profoundly unjust about that legacy. Timothy O'Brien didn't die to teach us a lesson. He died because his father was greedy and evil. The lesson we've taken from his death, the moral panic about stranger danger and poisoned candy, is false. It's the wrong lesson. If we wanted to honor Timothy's memory, if we actually wanted to prevent similar tragedies, we'd talk about the real statistics. We'd acknowledge that children are most often harmed by people they know and trust. We'd put resources into screening and monitoring people in positions of authority over children. We'd teach children about bodily autonomy and consent, and give them permission to say no to adults, even adults in their own families. We'd create robust systems for reporting and investigating abuse allegations. But that's harder. It's more uncomfortable. It requires looking at ugly truths about how families and institutions actually function. It's easier to check candy wrappers than to confront the violence happening in homes on your street. Ronald O'Brien understood something dark about human nature. We want simple explanations and external enemies. He knew that if his son died from poisoned Halloween candy distributed in the neighborhood, attention would focus outward, on catching the random psychopath who did it. He almost got away with it precisely because the narrative he'd created, the story of stranger danger, was one that people were already primed to believe. He weaponized our pre-existing fears against us. So what do we do with this information? How do we break free from a moral panic that's been embedded in American culture for 50 years? It starts with acknowledging the truth. The truth is that strangers rarely harm children. The truth is that Halloween candy tampering by random community members is virtually non-existent. The truth is that the real threats to children come from within circles of trust, from people who have access and authority. The truth is that a childhood lived in constant, supervised fear is not safer than one with appropriate freedom and independence. The truth is that community bonds and social trust are protective factors, not dangers to be eliminated.
The truth is that Ronald Clark O'Brien was not a representation of your neighbors or your community. He was an aberration, a monster, a man whose evil was specific and individual. Every October, we have a choice. We can continue the rituals of paranoia, teaching another generation that the world is hostile and trust is dangerous. Or we can reclaim Halloween as what it was meant to be, a night of play and imagination, of community connection, of children experiencing the joy of moving through their neighborhoods with confidence and delight. We can inspect the candy if it makes us feel better, but we can also acknowledge that we're performing a ritual to soothe our anxiety, not actually protecting against a real threat. We can teach our children to be smart and aware without teaching them to be afraid of everyone. We can rebuild the social fabric that has been torn apart by decades of fear-mongering. Timothy O'Brien died 51 years ago. His father was executed 41 years ago. The crime is solved. The murderer is dead. Justice, such as it was, has been served. But we're still living in fear of a threat that never really existed. We're still checking our children's candy, still warning them about strangers, still believing the lie that Ronald O'Brien's crime somehow proved. It's time to let go. Not to be careless or reckless, but to be rational, to base our precautions on actual evidence rather than on myths and moral panics, to honor Timothy's memory not by spreading fear, but by working to protect children from the real dangers they actually face. The real dark history of Halloween isn't about poisoned candy. It's about how easily we can be manipulated by fear. It's about how one man's evil act can warp an entire culture. It's about how we've allowed paranoia to replace community, suspicion to replace trust, and surveillance to replace freedom. Every time you check your child's Halloween candy, you're participating in a ritual that Ronald O'Brien helped create. You're living in the world he made. Maybe it's time to build a different one. The choice is yours. The candy was never the danger. It was always the fear itself.